Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Gulf of Mexico Forum webinar. I appreciate everybody joining. The webinar series is brought to you by NOAA's Gulf of Mexico Regional Collaboration Team, which is part of NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network. Just a few quick housekeeping type items before we get going. When you're dialing in for audio, hopefully everybody can hear me, but audio is available via the webinar computer interface, the GoToWebinar link that you logged in through, or the webinar provided phone line. If you're joining by phone, please enter your audio pin so we can enable the audio controls. So if you're looking for where the audio pin is, if you go to audio, please just click on it and go to the, if you logged in via phone, the audio pin will come up and just enter it. And if you've already done that, then it won't show anymore. So that's good. And please pardon the technical difficulties and the slight delay in joining. We were getting some stuff sorted out here. All right, so first off, we are recording today's presentation. So please do not share any personal or business identifiable information. Participants will be joined in mute status. That's to reduce background noise and so we can hear our speaker today. Except for presenters, please do leave your webcam off. That makes it easier for everyone to focus on our speaker. And we will be monitoring the question and chat box for written questions throughout. And if there's a timely question, we'll interrupt Sasha and ask the question. And otherwise, we'll keep the Q&A for the end. All right, so Sasha, I'm going to turn the presentation view over to you, and I will read your introduction while you're getting everything set up on your end.
Sounds great.
All right. There we go. All right. So once again, thank you everybody for joining and welcome to Sasha Francis. Sasha is the Gulf Restoration Education and Outreach Manager with the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, working with NOAA and other partners on the restoration of Mesophotic and deep Benthic communities that were injured by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. She leads strategic efforts to share the restoration activities being conducted by 4 collaborative project teams and increase awareness of the existence and importance of these communities, threats that they face, and actions that can be taken to protect them. Sasha's previous roles include being a marine mammal behaviorist, a zookeeper, and Texas watershed environmental educator. So really fascinating background, Sasha, and I am looking forward to the presentation. And I am seeing your title screen good and clear.
Fantastic. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you well. Thank you.
All right. Wonderful. Okay. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And as Kristen said, my name is Sasha Francis, and I'm the Education and Outreach Manager for the Mesophotic and Deep Benthic Communities Restoration Project. So I'm not sure if does this look okay, Kristen? It popped up a little box here for me.
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here. There we go. All right, so just a quick overview of today's agenda so you can figure out where we're going as we're going. I'm going to give a brief Deepwater Horizon oil spill and damage assessment overview, talk about and describe what are Mesophotic and deep Benthic communities, because it is a mouthful, and then an overview of the restoration work we're doing, kind of the who, what, where, and why, to get everyone here familiar with all the different activities we have going on. I'll discuss the 4 interconnected MDBC, as we call it, projects, some expeditions we've accomplished so far, and some highlights of this past year. So an overview of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, in case there are some on the line that are not familiar with this. It happened April 20th in 2010, and I live in Galveston, but I moved down there in 2012, so I was not there for this incident. But I have a lot of love for the Gulf Coast now that I've lived there for about 12 years. So this mobile drilling unit exploded, causing a massive release of oil from the Macondo well, which is about 40 miles off the coast of Louisiana. 11 workers unfortunately lost their lives that day, and approximately 134 million gallons of oil spilled into the ocean over the course of 87 days until they capped it. It was the largest offshore oil spill in U.S. history. So the natural resource damage assessment is a legal process that happens after a disaster like this to make the environment and the public whole for injuries to natural resources and services. So that includes, the impacts to fishing, whether that be for someone's livelihood, commercial fishing, as well as recreation too, along the Gulf Coast. And then in addition to that, all of the natural resources that were impacted, which is what we're focusing on with our restoration. So the Deepwater Horizon case is managed by some federal trustees listed here and agencies from each of the 5 Gulf states as well. There's just some numbers here on the settlement that was decided upon for 13 different restoration types. And the Mesophotic and Deep Benthic communities restoration is just one of those 13 types. So there's a lot of amazing work going on in the Gulf of Mexico to help restore habitats, recreational opportunities, and resources along the Gulf. So after this natural resource damage assessment, these are the things that were determined here regarding the habitats we're focusing on. So there was damage to 770 square miles of deep sea habitat, which deep benthic is defined as greater than about 1,000 feet. Observed surrounding the wellhead. So if you see this image here, you can see a map showing where that documented benthic injury extent was in red outlined. The surface oil extent in that yellow plume, the oil spill itself there in that brown plume, and then potential benthic exposure outlined in yellow. So there was substantial losses to corals and fish in mesophotic habitat, which with our projects we're defining as past 160 feet from the surface, and documented oil exposure to an additional 2,900 to 4,600 square miles of benthic habitat. So what do these habitats look like? I know probably not everyone is familiar with what we call mesophotic and deep benthic communities. Some people are familiar with, the deep ocean. Oftentimes it's, the Pacific, the deep Pacific is talked about, or shipwrecks in certain areas. But usually when people hear about coral reefs, they think about shallow stony corals or those big brain corals, reefs like the flower garden banks, which I'll talk about more here because those now include some mesophotic coral communities. But here we're going to talk about some that aren't really seen because these are past recreational dive limits since they started about 160 feet. So really, it's really, really hard to get to them and it's very hard to see them. So I'm going to give you a little insight here and a little peek into this world, which we access using underwater robots, which I'll talk a little bit more about too. So this is some imagery from the mesophotic habitat. So that's about 160 feet to about 1,000 feet. As you can see, even though there's only about a 10% penetration of light at these depths, it's really colorful. This even surprised me when I started working with these habitats and education and related to them. It's really colorful, really beautiful, very diverse in these depths, which you might not expect it being so dark down there. So you can see a really gorgeous coral shelf here in these mesophotic corals. And over here on the right, you can see one of the many creatures that lives down there. That's a moray eel, giving us a little side eye here as we approach with our underwater robot. Here's another picture of that gorgeous coral shelf here. And that looks like a scamp there. And then on the right, you'll see one of our priority coral species for restoration. That's Swiftia exerta. It's an octocoral, and they call it that because it has 8 little tentacles on every single one of its little polyps, which you see if you look at the kind of the branches here, you'll see those little polyps sticking out. So that's why they're called octocorals, and they're soft corals, which is different from those stony hard corals you might be used to. So they kind of flow there in the current underwater. They do like to attach to kind of harder bottom versus really, really soft sedimenty mud down there. So usually what we're looking for is that kind of harder surface that we'll see along the deep sea floor. And over here, this is some imagery from the deep benthic zone. So again, that's past that 1,000-foot mark. So here you can see some images. These were actually taken about a mile down. So over 5,000 feet down in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's really gorgeous. You're even still seeing really bright colors here, these purples and yellows. and then some brittle stars here, which we call associates, that live on or around the corals. So that's probably my favorite phrase we use to nickname something. And then going a little bit farther here, you'll see some squat lobsters, some of my favorites. You can see them perched on that other coral there on the left with some more brittle stars. And on the right, a Schaefer's anglerfish, which is a delightful little guy. And on the left here, you'll see what we called the Coral Cave from one of our recent expeditions in September off the Nancy Foster. That was a really neat place that they came upon that had really rich diversity, colorful corals, really a lot to look at and check out down there. So we have a lot of great footage to assess the different habitats that we can find and where we might want to do that restoration work. And over here on the right, you'll see another favorite of mine, the Dumbo octopus. You can see they have those little flaps on the side of their head that they use to help get around through the water column, and then they often just settle there on the seafloor. So what is MDVC restoration? What exactly are we doing and how are we able to do this? So like I mentioned earlier, it's one of the 13 types of restoration following the Deepwater Horizon spill. So there's different restoration types related to each individual state, but there's also the open ocean restoration type, which is where we fall under. So that includes fish, sea turtles, marine mammals, and these Mesophotic and deep benthic communities. We got the longest and most complicated restoration type. So this consists of actually 4 different interconnected project teams working together to restore these habitats. So I'll tell you a little bit more about those. So why are we doing this, and what are we really hoping to accomplish here? So we want to restore these habitats, the invertebrate and fish abundance, and resiliency for the injured species down there. We want to actively manage valuable Mesophotic and deep benthic communities to protect against threats, provide a framework for monitoring these areas, as well as education and outreach, which is where I come in, and improve our understanding of these habitats. There's really not a whole lot known about these coral communities at these deeper levels. They haven't really been well studied, well documented. So that's something that we're really working to do across these different expeditions. And then using all the information we gathered during all these projects, we really want to inform better management and ensure resiliency going into the future. So we're going to be utilizing all this information that we gather to actually provide it to public and management entities so that we can hopefully protect these habitats going into the future. So I don't normally put this much text on a slide, but we have a lot of amazing partners and amazing staff throughout our 4 project teams. So I really didn't want to leave many people out here. And we're actually up in Rhode Island for a project workshop where we're all getting together and talking about our plans for 2024. So here's some people I just wanted to mention, all the different NOAA offices that are involved in this work and leading the charge, along with departments of DOI, the Department of the Interior, USGS. They do a lot of our incredible sediment sampling, testing for contaminants, and seeing what's down there in that mud I mentioned. BOEM as well. And then we have amazing partners, the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, who's my employer and supporting a lot of this work, which I'll touch on a little bit more. The Navy, the Ocean Exploration Cooperative Institute, which is housed here at University of Rhode Island, my alma mater. Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, as well as multiple universities, museums, aquariums, and more. So there's a lot of people taking part in this restoration work. So where is it that we're working in the Gulf? So we're working in the Northern Gulf. So you can see this kind of line we've delineated here to show you our project areas. So you can see that green dot identifying the Macondo well, which is that wellhead that caused the oil spill. And you can see there's kind of some shelf here, the continental shelf you can see underneath there where that depth starts to go down. And so these are the areas that we're working in primarily along the Louisiana coast here with a lot of the concentration of our work, but then also off the coast of Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, all those states where communities were impacted by the oil spill. So now I'm going to talk about those 4 different projects, kind of how they work together and all the different great work that they're doing. So we have our mapping, ground truthing, and predictive habitat modeling team, and they're working really hard to make newer, higher resolution maps of the Gulf of Mexico than have ever been made before. much more fine detail so that we can actually look for and find these coral communities that may not have been spotted before. So when we're using those high resolution maps, which I'll talk about a little bit more here shortly, we can better predict where these habitats might be found and be able to go see those habitats, get imagery, get some information that we can use for informing that resiliency and informing management. Habitat assessment and evaluation team, they're the ones using a lot of the ROVs or underwater robots that have cameras, video cameras and still cameras on them to, again, visit those habitats that the MGM team has hopefully identified using their maps. Go out and see what's out there and really try to see how these different communities are connected using even eDNA and other analysis and seeing really all the different types of communities that are out there and evaluating where they're located and a little bit more about their history. And then the coral propagation development technique development team, they're working specifically with 12 priority coral species that were identified during that original assessment process as they were developing plans for this restoration work. They selected 12 priority coral species that were either the highest number of observed injuries or very significant to the connectivity and to the habitat as a whole. So those are the ones that they're looking to collect samples of, bring into labs to learn more about their reproductive history and how they grow, how fast they grow, how they reproduce, and in what conditions they like to settle on. And then the active management protection team, that's the team that I'm on, and they're working to evaluate threats like marine debris, invasive species like lionfish you see here in this picture, as well as get that information from all these different projects to those management groups and out into the general public and other audiences through education and outreach. So here I'm going to just play a video. Hopefully you can see there's no audio, so we won't have to worry about any sort of lag. But this is just a video. I figured you'd want to maybe see some of the amazing content our underwater robots, our remote operated vehicles get of these habitats. And again, just how colorful and diverse they can be. Oh, just kidding. Here we go. So you can see there's tons of fish and then really opens up to this very vibrant coral community. So you'll see a variety of different octocoral species there. We see sponges, anemones, all sorts of fish, crabs, these whip corals that you see sticking out and coiling here. So this is a Mesophotic habitat, which is again within that, that range of about 150 to 1,000 feet. Again, another brightly colored section and that moray eel again. Actually, I'm pretty sure this is the same one. Now here's some imagery from the oil spill impacts here. So these images were collected by Eric Cordes from some of the evaluation assessment expeditions right after the oil spill. So you can see how they're damaged. You can see how all those polyps are covered with that oil. You can see how it degrades the coral as a whole. Remember the ones you saw earlier, their polyps were wide open. They were very vibrant and full looking. So here's what they looked like after. And here's some photos from the assessment. So we're using underwater remote operated vehicles. Here's one of them now. That one's actually owned by National Marine Sanctuary Foundation and operated by UNCW Underwater Vehicles Program. We also use AUVs or autonomous underwater vehicles. This is the Remus 600 from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And here's some great imagery of an egg release from that Swiftia octocoral. This is in our Galveston lab actually. And you can see they're really, really healthy. Those polyps are open and you can see some little baby corals there as well. And there's that up close of the invasive species from the Active Management Protection Team and some footage of our expeditions and the Nancy Foster, which was one of the ships we utilize regularly for that. Oh, there we go. So I'm just going to dive a little bit into each of the 4 projects to give them a little limelight here to tell you about the great work that they're doing. So you can see here on the right, I was mentioning how the mapping and ground truthing predictive habitat modeling team, MGM, again, lots of mouthfuls and acronyms in this work, that they were making improved maps, higher resolution maps than ever before. So on the right, you can see previous resolutions on the bottom, and then you can see up top just how more detailed these maps that we're getting are. So we can really get to see where those corals might be, those coral communities might be based on that hard bottom you can see there popping up in those different features. So the MGM team is improving understanding of these community locations to inform better management, inform the other project teams, and know where these are so that in the future, when we're conveying this information to management entities, we can really give them some guidance, hopefully, on where these concentrations of communities are. They're documenting the abundance and distribution of these communities in the Northern Gulf of Mexico, providing that fundamental information like these high resolution maps so we can prioritize where we're going to go with our other teams' works, and support protection and management activities and target locations for direct restoration, so where we might outplant some corals, which I'll talk about as well. So how are they doing this? So they're gathering existing data. You know, it's really important to not reinvent the wheel and to really be efficient with this work. So they are gathering as much as they can of existing data and working with that to kind of fill in the blanks. So they're doing gap analysis to figure out what has to still be mapped, where there's not enough information, and prioritizing those locations so that we, as you know, a restoration community as a whole in the Gulf, can really do as much work as possible to know exactly what's out there. So they're acquiring those new maps and imagery as well. Some of the AUVs, like the Sentry here, they do also have cameras that can actually get imagery as well as while it's mapping. We're ground truthing this information, which is really just, you know, confirming with your own eyes that what you believe to be down there is down there using that imaging technology. Sorry if you can hear the lawnmower out there. They're developing habitat maps and models to inform other projects for locations and sharing this with scientific and recreational community. So we're all working together here. The habitat assessment and evaluation team is improving understanding of those deep sea communities, their makeup, connectivity, distribution. They're filling critical data gaps. Like I mentioned, there's a lot that's really not known about these habitats and these species down here. So it's really important that we gather as much information as possible for direct restoration and protection. So they're identifying any ongoing impacts, assessing natural and anthropogenic threats to these communities as well. You can see one of our expeditions last season, this is right after I started, working with the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary on their research vessel, actually, going out and checking out the Flower Garden Banks, which we do work with them to utilize that unimpacted area, protected area as a reference site for what these mesophotic habitats should look like. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go too. So habitat assessment evaluation, how are they doing this important work? So they're observing and evaluating habitats using ROVs. So you can see an underwater picture of that ROV you saw earlier, the Mohawk. Sediment species sampling, genetic and other analysis. You can see some sediment cores here on the right. That's actually about a mile down in the Gulf of Mexico, pulling up sediment tubes to do some testing on that with USGS. And then comparing those injured sites to non-injured sites, which is again where the Flower Garden Banks comes in really handy. They have a really long-term data set, even on these mesophotic habitats that were on the outskirts of the sanctuary, but are now included from their expansion in 2021, which added another 14 banks to that protected habitat, which is amazing. So they're determining a baseline for health and condition to guide restoration. So you can see kind of how all these puzzle pieces are fitting together. So the coral propagation technique team, as we call them, CPT, why are they doing this? Another part of the puzzle. Again, the whole goal here is restoring these habitats and all of the different wildlife that relies on these habitats for foundation of the food web, to live, to reproduce, etc. So it's not just the corals that we're working with, it's also the invertebrates, the fish, everything that's part of that important ecosystem. So direct restoration efforts is really special for this team because they're actually taking coral fragments from big healthy corals, just small fragments, and actually moving them onto these specially designed racks and putting them out where they will grow more and more colonies in the Gulf of Mexico. That's the hope. So I'll talk a little bit more about that too. I have a cool video to share with that. And then indirect is, again, the recovery of the fish abundance and biomass, because you know, the more you bring back these corals, the more of that habitat you provide for everything else that relies on it. So what are they doing? They're developing the best methods and techniques for coral recruitment, or, you know, if that coral's spawning or budding, what does it want to settle on? What kind of substrates is it looking for when it's going to settle? Because that's going to help us identify what they can best grow on as we're doing this outplanting here, like you see in this image. This is a way to directly compensate for the loss of these coral species, and then again, help with that ecosystem as a whole. So they're gathering samples of the priority coral species I mentioned earlier, propagating them in our federal and partner labs. We have 3 federal labs, as well as we're working right now with aquariums. So I'll talk some more about the different aquariums we're partnering with. But we're testing and evaluating the best materials. So using different textured tiles and substrates to see if they'll grow on those. Like you saw in that video, those little baby corals at the bottom, those were on some textured tiles. And then really evaluating that, how they're growing, how fast it takes for them to settle, what they like to settle on, so that we'll know how best to set them up for propagation opportunities out in the field. Outplanting coral fragments back in the Gulf of Mexico, like you saw in that image, monitoring those outplanting locations for growth and survival rates so that we can continue getting better at this, so we can restore those coral species. And then recommend these successful methods to be implemented at larger scales to restore and replace those injured corals. And this is really great information also for the future to continue work like this. So I'm going to show you a video from this past May where our coral team went out and tried that outplanting for the very first time. So they actually built a deep sea coral elevator where they placed those coral racks that they adhered those small fragments to that rack. They placed them in the coral elevator, they lower them down, and then that ROV, the Beagle, that one just picks it up, and that one's owned by MARE, Marine Applied Research and Exploration. And that ROV will pick it up and move it and place it gently on the sea floor where they can be monitored in the future. So check this out. I made this little compilation video, and I'll provide a link in the chat later for where you can see this article and video. There's no real audio, there's just some music. So there they are, placing the corals on the rack in the deep sea elevator, getting them all ready. So there was 3 different coral species, the Swiftia, another species called Mauricia, and Thesia. And you can see them being lowered. So they went about 230 feet down with this first coral outplanting location. And this is video from the Beagle using its manipulator claw there, manipulator arm, gently placing it down with a buoy so we can easily find it again. And then divers will come back and check on it. So remember that buoy number, 411. So we're gonna also update on that. So since that was done, we did actually have some divers go out there through a cooperative agreement supported by the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. We have some, there we go. We had a follow-up expedition with some divers. So a team of technical divers coordinated by Moody Gardens Aquarium, NOAA, Cal Academy of Sciences, and supported by that National Marine Sanctuary Foundation agreement. They actually went out, returned to the outplanting site, and measured and photographed the coral fragments. So they discovered that they had, at this time, had a 95% survival rate over the last 2 months, and they all appeared healthy, which is excellent outcome, as the baseline natural survival rate of aquacorals is about 92%. So you can see here, if you look at the number on that rack, that's the same one we just saw in the video. I thought that was really neat. And next we'll move on to the last project here, which is the project team I'm on. So the Active Management Protection, or AMP team. So we are actively managing the communities. So again, looking for threats and providing a framework for monitoring education and outreach. So you can see kind of our 3 different work elements here: education, outreach, that's where I reside. So doing outreach events, coordinating with our aquarium partners for exhibits, as well as doing different direct engagement opportunities like this, and creating resources for people to learn about all this restoration. So here on the right, you'll see an event I did with Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary and the foundation. And we're working with kids in the community and families in the community in Galveston here with another nonprofit that works with underserved communities and families, get them out here to try some snorkeling and to learn about all the different mesophotic species, and try some activities, as well as driving a mini ROV, which the kids were really good at, much better than me, actually. The threat reduction team is looking at marine debris sites and actually going to be working with Navy saturation divers, hopefully, to get down there and hopefully try to remove some of the marine debris targets that they have identified. And then science to management is where that component of getting all this information together and engaging with management entities will come into play. So education and outreach, which I was just mentioning through that picture I showed, one of the many, many things I've been doing this year. So really there's a lot of variety of techniques with what we're doing with education and outreach. We have some new public venue exhibits at Mississippi Aquarium, Audubon Aquarium, and then we're working with some other partners to develop educational resources and do some events. We are also working with Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, and we've been working with folks here at URI's Inner Space Center to host telepresence. So connecting the community, classrooms, et cetera, directly with scientists at sea on our ships to be able to see what's going on in real time. So that's been very, very exciting. We did some of that this year, and it was definitely the highlight for me. So threat reduction, assessing those different threats that are out there, and how we can ideally remove some of them, selecting priority sites for that. And then again, coordinating with me to express some prevention, as well as get information out into the community about what we're seeing. And then that science to management component. So a little overview of our 2022 cruise season. So we are still working on the metrics for this past 2023, but it was around 150 days that we got out this year. So this is some stats from the previous year, what we were able to accomplish, which was really exciting. And there's actually cruise reports that are publicly available for anyone that wants to check it out. And we also have a story map that actually goes through every single cruise from 2022, which we'll be updating for 2023. So you can see exactly where we went, exactly what all the scientists were doing. Here's a map of where we went this past year. So you can see, and I mentioned about 150 days at sea. Here's some locations that we explored and related to the Gulf Coast. So some of the assets that we're using, some of those ROVs, AUVs, multi-core is that sediment core, CTD for conductivity, temperature, and depth, and other markers that we're looking for using some of these other tools. So in 2023, the MGM team processed a ton of data. Not the most fun part, but that's okay. Again, you can see another image of how much more improved these maps are looking with our MGM team's hard work. They also participated in our telepresence broadcast that I got to host, which was very fun, working with our mapping scientists, our mapping teams and technicians and crew on the Nancy Foster to help people learn about maps, because it's, not necessarily intuitively the most exciting thing for people, because it can be a little overwhelming to learn about. So that was very fun to connect people to that topic. And continuing to inform habitat and species models, characterizing benthic habitats, and identifying features so that we know where to go next. The habitat team did a ton of ROV surveys, sediment sampling with USGS, telepresence broadcast with us as well for the general public, and we got to do one for the USGS staff that doesn't really necessarily work in the field. There's some that do, that want to learn about what their colleagues are doing, and that was very fun. They do a lot of the sediment sampling, and I really liked, sharing how exciting mud can be. Processing a bunch of data and downward photos, counting and classifying organisms' habitats. They also work with the scientists at Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, classifying and cataloging a lot of these species. So we'll have this knowledge for a very long time to look back on and compare and learn more about, especially with that eDNA. Coral propagation team. Oh, here's a picture that was kind of pretty quick at the end of that video. You can see those baby corals settling on those tiles. This is the Galveston lab where they're working to figure out how quick those corals grow, where they like to settle. That's that Swiftia coral again. They did the first outplanting trials, which I showed you that video from, collection of mesophotic species for aquarium partners to do this work as well and learn more about them. And then continuing this lab work at our 3 federal labs and developing that partner lab network at those aquariums I mentioned. Frost Aquarium is another one that we'll be working with. And then really learning more about the biology and reproduction. Cold systems, building out cold systems to support those deeper corals where that temperature is colder, continuing testing propagation methods, etc. So the active management protection team, that's me. I'm doing a bunch of education outreach. Here's a picture from the Smithsonian, one of the telepresence events we did, where you can see imagery from the Nancy Foster, where we had about 185 participants come in for 2 short programs to connect with scientists, ask them questions directly. It was very cool. So I've been working on building and implementing education and outreach strategies through these different venue partnerships, working on resources for students and teachers, building up this telepresence program, doing some of those fun outreach events with community members and presentations, and working with a team to work on social media and web stories to share more information. Threat reduction database was developed with our threat reduction coordinator, identifying those marine debris targets and what we hope to do in 2024 for field activities, working with Navy saturation divers. Also establishing regular engagements and meetings with natural resource managers for that science to management component. So building up that community. So if you're wondering where you can find these restoration updates, like what's happening, what's going on, where's these different publications coming out. So our publications can be found on the NOAA Institutional Repository, which is publicly accessible. You can put in the keyword MDBC, and you'll be able to find all the publications we've released so far, and that's where they'll continue to be updated. Our data is archived with NCEI, and that will be publicly available as well. And then updates and stories, we've written quite a few so far. The Gulf Spill Restoration website, which is very easy to find. That's where all of the different restoration types, information, and updates live. You can actually go on there and sign up for update emails where you'll get updates on the different restoration projects and opportunities to learn like this. The Office of Habitat Conservation, which is a NOAA Fisheries page. We have our main web page where you can learn about these 4 projects I mentioned if you wanted to dive a little deeper. And you'll see all the different web page or web stories, articles, things that will link on there as well as they come in. We have another page on the NCOS website, which is another NOAA line office. And we have the story map and webinar materials from our April public webinar, which we'll be doing again in 2024 with some updates. And here's the article where that video I shared came from. So if you go to, the best place to start is probably the Office of Habitat Conservation webpage, which we can put in the chat. And that's where you'll find all these other articles and all these other resources, links to the story maps and whatnot, and in a really understandable fashion. So I know some of these publications will be very jargony, very complex. So these other web pages I'm mentioning are a lot more user-friendly and general public-friendly to understand what we're up to. So thank you for listening. I think I hit the time pretty well here, so we have time for questions. I'm going to leave this up here so that if anybody wanted to go ahead and scan that QR code, you'll see that main web page I mentioned on the left, where you can find an explanation of the different projects, some more cool pictures, and then at the very bottom, a link of those different stories we've had so far, how to get to publications, the story map. And on the right is a direct link to the story map where you can explore our expeditions, which again, we hope to update for this past expedition season, probably by about February. We're aiming to do that. And then just some notes of our partners here below that you can check out if you're interested. I definitely recommend the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation and the Flower Garden Bank's National Marine Sanctuary webpage. They have some great articles, videos, learning resources, and they've been very, very helpful with us in this restoration work. So, all right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, I think, if everybody's gotten that. We can always bring it back up if needed. All right, beautiful.
Thank you so much, Sasha. I swear, I don't even know how many times I said, that is so cool.
Oh, good. Did you want me to pull that screen back up again? Or are you good?
Yeah, just so people can, get their phones out and scan the QR codes and such.
Okay.
And so everyone is aware, Sasha did share the links that were in her slide deck with me. So I'll make sure that those are in the follow-up email afterwards. And I'll also double check and make sure that the links work directly from the PDF too. So
Fabulous.
we have
Okay.
some questions coming in, and just a couple to get going. And everyone, if you haven't found it yet, there should be a question box in your GoToWebinar little vertical menu thing. It'll look like a chat box, or a typed questions here might be in brackets down there. So feel free to add them in. Just a couple questions to get rolling while everybody is typing. I was wondering, it's been a while, so I'm curious, how long is the NERDA work expected to continue in these deep habitats?
Great question. The restoration work that I was talking about really started in about 2020, and we are scheduled right now to wrap up evaluating everything by 2027. But hopefully, we will be able to continue this great work after that. So that's something that will continue to be assessed as we go on. But hopefully, with all this great information that we're gathering, this is something that we will be able to continue. But that's the timeline for now.
Wow, it's a lot to get done.
Yes, and we're working with in my role, working with the partner venues to get these educational exhibits and information rolled out. That might wrap up a little bit earlier, but give us some time to evaluate how people engaged with it, to see what we might be able to add if we do get to continue the work into the future.
Great, thank you. All right, a question from the audience. Did each of the restoration types have the same restoration credits? It seems like the benefits from the different categories would not all offer the same impacts to resources, like coral restoration is more direct and immediate, for example.
Oh, compared to like building up fish stock and things like that? Like the other of the 13 restoration types, you mean?
I think so, or was there, yes.
Yeah, I think
that
that
was from Jessica White, and she just typed in yes as well. So
okay, great. So yeah, I mean, there's the 13 different restoration types are pretty varied all along the Gulf Coast, but some of them being things like marsh grass wetland restoration along the coast, which is something else that can have some really immediate results. So I previously worked in wetland restoration in the Gulf area as well, and you can see replanting marsh habitats like that. It can grow back within, not filling the whole area, but marsh grass can grow and create some marsh habitat within just a couple of years. So I encourage you to go to the Gulfsville Restoration website and check out all the different types of restoration work that's going on, because there is some of that that kind of fast growing wetland habitat restoration going on right along the coast that people might be able to see a little bit more easily. Hope that answered your question.
Cool, thank you. And there's also a note about the different activities, and there's the direct impacts as well as the education and outreach is more of a long-term and not as direct impact, but very important for the future too.
Yeah, definitely. And it is, the Gulf community especially, we are working with Smithsonian, and we're going to share our education outreach resources with whoever is interested, whether they be in another country or here along, where I live along the Gulf Coast. But that Gulf Coast community was the ones most immediately impacted by this incident. So it's really great to be able to get information out to them, get opportunities out to them to learn about this, because this happened in their backyard and probably affected people they knew in a variety of ways. So it's really amazing that we'll be able to share this with them and let them kind of see this world that is really hard to reach and kind of mysterious.
Indeed. Great. All right, we've got a couple questions about coral propagation coming in. So the first one from Mary Doberstein, and apologies if I mispronounced yours or anybody's name.
Oh, I think I know her.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, it's early yet, but are there any coral species that the propagation team is seeing success and is hopeful for them to be able to propagate them?
Yeah, so those three species that I showed the video from our very first outplanting effort were the Swiftia exerta, that orange, that really gorgeous orange one, the Mauricia pendula, which was the small white ones that you saw fragments of on that coral rack, and then the Thesia nivea is a purple one. That's just the easiest way to describe them. So those three different octocorals are the ones that they've been working with the most so far at those mesophotic depths. So they have successfully done that first outplanting in May, which they hope to do some more of this year, and gone back and revisited it with that dive team to see that they are growing and appear healthy in that outplanting setup that they've established. So that's just one of the trials that they're doing. And they did see so far that those corals are doing really well. Also in the labs, they're really doing well in the labs and are continuing to spawn, which is really exciting. You know, they were originally gathered right around spawning season, and they did spawn in the labs. So it's really amazing to see them continue to demonstrate that. Because that's the sign of, you know, healthy corals, is when you see those polyps open and they are reproducing. So far so good with those three species that they've worked most with so far.
Very
which they're
cool.
going to continue kind of adding to that and hopefully working with those deeper corals as well.
Mm-hmm. And how long does it take for corals to grow? And I mean, are they noticing, do they grow faster in the laboratory, or is it about the same rate?
So that's one of the things that they're actually looking to learn. So because we've just, you know, started this in the last couple of years, and especially with these coral collections and first outplantings, we're still kind of in the beginnings of seeing how that plays out. So when you saw those little baby corals in the lab, they're, you know, only this big, but they're going to be measuring and monitoring them throughout the next couple of years. So we will have this information. That's exactly what we're looking for. So we're not sure yet. But I mean, some corals can take, you know, hundreds or longer years to grow. So some of these are really, really old, you know, old corals, which is again why it's so important that we are able to reestablish some of them in the field and grow more colonies, because some of those that were injured could have been very, very old and taken a very long time to grow with the size of them. So, you know, it is a huge loss. You know, it's like cutting down a tree. It's a huge loss that, you know, that coral was growing for a long time. So these are some of the things we're learning. So we'll keep you posted.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Lauren Waters asks, what ultimately happens with the racks? Is the expectation to leave those outplants in place and restoration is a matter of the racks being placed across the bottom, or how does that work?
Good question. I don't 100% know the plan with those specific racks, but I do know that when they placed them in, they placed them on, you know, those kind of smaller stone-like bases and then put them into the holes in the rack. So I am not 100% sure, but I think there's options for placing them without the big PVC base rack once they start to kind of grow a little bit and be established. When you see the ones in the lab, you can see they kind of like spread over their little bases. So they'll definitely spread and be able to, well, we hope, but we've seen them spread and establish themselves. So that's the goal. And they are going to be trying different types of placements out in the field. So not just that rack that you saw, there's going to be some different substrates and whatnot that they're trying. So again, we'll hopefully be learning what they like best and how they best grow. It's the exciting part.
Yeah. And do you just like set it on the bottom, or do they have to like cement them in place or anchor them somehow, or?
Yeah, so one of the other things they're testing is like what different types of like safe adhesives hold up best underwater. So there's one that is made from like mussels, called CTAC, I believe, made from mussels, and that's something that they're working with to see they're actually measuring like how long those different types of adhesives last underwater. That's another one of the things they're doing in the labs is kind of testing those to see what works best, because we want to use as much as possible the most environmentally safe options, obviously, that are biodegradable. So that's one of the things they're working with, is that muscle-based adhesive.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah, I thought that was very fascinating too.
Yeah, have it.
They think of everything, I swear.
A lot of really creative, smart people working on this, which is great.
Very, very creative, smart people. Exactly. They fascinate me daily.
Very cool. I hear you. All right, we have a question from Andrew Evans. Do you see any lingering effects from the use of correxant dispersant agent during the spills on the Deepwater communities?
That's something else that they have monitored with these contaminant studies. So the sediment samples that they're doing, that is, I know that during the natural resource damage assessment, that's something that they were looking at during that time period, which is before the restoration. So if you go to the Gulf Spill Restoration website, you'll be able to see the reports from that assessment period, which was more immediately after the oil spill, when those dispersants would have been detected. So if you go to the Gulf Spill Restoration website and you look up the oil spill reports, that's where you can get some more of that immediate information related to the dispersants. But I will say, as we're doing these sediment cores and testing for components of the sediment, that's where we're going to be looking out for things like that, traces of things in the sediment, specifically related to these Mesophotic and deep benthic communities. So that's something we're keeping our eye on, although we're not doing, assessment from the oil spill impacts anymore. We're doing the restoration component now. That's still what we're keeping our eye on when we're out there taking samples. If that makes sense.
Got it. Thank you. And again, I'll make sure that that link and the other links that you shared are in the follow-up email as well for everybody to have available. All right. David Yao is asking, were there any invasive species particularly troublesome in the spill impacted areas?
In the Gulf of Mexico as a whole, the lionfish is kind of the most notable one that we've seen in abundance. And the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary, they do a lot of evaluation of lionfish. They actually will do gut contents analysis of lionfish that they catch and remove, to really see what they're eating and see what they might be out competing and what smaller species of fish they might be over consuming. So I would say that in these same areas, the lionfish is the one we see the most so far. That's kind of has information readily available about it. But that's something else, our habitat team, I'm sure, is looking out for when they're doing their field activities.
Got it. Thank you. All right. And we have a couple of thank yous and great presentations in the question box as well. Yeah. All right. We have, all right, one more question. And this is again on the propagation side, but are there challenges with the pressure changes? Because I mean, you're propagating these things and you're putting them on the rack up at the surface level, and then you're taking them down pretty deep. So are there challenges with pressure changes as you bring the coral pieces and baby corals down to habitat at depth?
That's a great question. And that's something that I asked when I started too. I said, wait, how are you doing this? And the pressure and the light, and especially in the Mesophotic zone, which again, the corals that we were collecting and then outplanting so far during that May expedition was about 230 feet down. So not terribly deep so far. And we do have those, divers can actually go to those depths, really advanced divers. But the corals, when they collect them, they actually use that ROV manipulator arm you saw moving the rack over. They actually use that to collect a segment of it. And they open up a box on the ROV, and they place it in that box. And in that box is all the water. It collects water directly from that same area where that coral is. Just naturally opens the box, there's water. The water goes in. So what they do when they bring it up to the surface on the ship is they'll keep it in that water as much as possible so that it maintains the temperature, salinity. They'll actually check the temperature, salinity, and everything of that water so that they can continue to recreate it and keep the coral in that water that's as identical as possible to where it came from. And surprisingly, we haven't seen so far any real changes in the way that they appear when they come up from depth. So you can see their polyps are wide open, and they, you know, appear to be the same. So that's good news. So it doesn't seem so far that that is anything that impacts them is changing that pressure. And the coral labs work really closely together to mimic the temperature, the salinity, the flow, the light, and everything in all of their labs, so that they can keep it as similar as possible. But yes, as far as doing the deep collections yet, that's yet to be seen. We'll be doing hopefully some more of that in the near future. So that's something that we'll be learning about as we go.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, I see we're a little bit just past time. So Sasha, again, thank you so much for presenting today. This was really fascinating to hear about all the different things going on and learn more about the deep part of the Gulf of Mexico, because, you know, that's something that we don't get to see that often. So thank you. And it's just beautiful down there.
Yes, it's amazing. And I believe I shared my email address too, but if you'd like to put that in the chat as well, or in the follow-up information, that would be helpful if anybody wants to reach out about education and outreach opportunities. If they're, you know, if you're a teacher or you want to get some telepresence in your kid's school, I would love to add you to a list for that, but also going onto that Gulf Spill Restoration website and adding yourself to the mailing list. You can get updates regularly.
Wonderful. And I will certainly add those in the follow-up email with all of the attendees.
Fantastic.
So,
awesome. Well, thanks everyone for
awesome.
listening. I appreciate you taking some time out on your Thursday morning, or whatever time it is where you are.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you again, Sasha. And thanks to everyone for joining. Really appreciate your attention as always. And I also wanted to give a special shout out to the NOAA Disaster Response Center. I am visiting this week and they very graciously set me up so I'd be able to run the webinar from here. And thanks as always to also Shadalina for being my co-organizer and backing me up on the questions and the technical stuff. So thank you all again. Our next webinar will be in February of 2024. I can't believe we're saying that already, but it will be February 1st. And I'm working on the calendar for our webinars in the new calendar year. So if you have any topic ideas, please feel free to send them my way as well. So again, thank you, Sasha, and thank you, everyone. And thank you again to the Disaster Response Center for hosting me today, too. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your support.
Sure thing.